Welcome to video 3 of 3 on chapter 12, word choice. In this video, we're going to look at subject-verb agreement, and we're going to look at gendered pronouns in the English language. So in the last couple of videos, we were talking about the information that's stored in our lexicon. Remember, your lexicon is like your mental dictionary, and the words and their pronunciation and their meaning and their spelling are all stored together inside your brain. And of course, your brain does not store that information in the exact same way that a dictionary would store that information. Most of this information is unconscious. This is all working on a subconscious level. Even a 3-year-old who speaks English knows a lot of this information. And obviously a 3-year-old has no idea, no recognition that I have, oh, this word's a noun, this word's an adjective. They don't know how the word is spelled, so none of that's on a conscious level. We don't really realize what we know and how we know it until someone points it out to us. So a lot of things that we're talking about in these videos are things that you may not have really ever put any thought into before. Some of these details in our lexicon, in our heads, are connected to subject-verb agreement. So that's kind of one of the things we have to store in our lexicon when we're storing information about individual words. Agreement refers to the form that words take to show their connection to one another. We usually think about the singularity or plurality of a noun, and then how the determiner changes. Okay, so if we think about the words this or that, with singular nouns, this cat or that dog, we know that determiner, which is a demonstrative, this and that, must agree with the noun must be singular. If the noun is plural, cats, dogs, then we need a plural demonstrative, a plural determiner, these cats, those dogs. Agreement in this instance is an example of redundancy. Well, again, we talked about redundancy way back in chapter 1. It's another way to mark singularity or plurality of the noun phrase. We can see that we're marking whether this noun phrase is singular or plural in 2 locations. We add an S after the noun cats, dogs, but we also make the determiner plural, these, those. It's just something that we do in English to add clarity, right? Make sure that the person hearing us or the person reading this really understands this is a singular noun, this is a plural noun. If we went back 1,000 years ago to Old English that you might have encountered if you ever had to read Beowulf back in high school, and you've seen some examples of Old English, it doesn't even look like English. Old English might as well be a completely foreign language. This, my friends, is English, and it's very hard to see anything that looks like modern English. And if we went back that far, we would see that verb conjugation in Old English was way more complicated than it is now. The infinitive in modern English, we just add that infinitive marker to still. In Old English, you would get a suffix that would mark that verb as an infinitive, and then you would get a different suffix a different form of the verb if it's in the present or the past, if it's first person, I, second person, you, third person, he, she, or it, plural would be they or we. All of those forms get a different form of the verb. So you're looking here just for the verb still to, have 12, more than 12 forms of the verb. Luckily, thank goodness, right? English has lost almost all of these verb forms. And today, we really only have, other than past tense, which is different, we only have a different verb form if it's third person singular. For he, she, or it, we add that S. If the verb ends in a Y, we have to change the Y to an I, add ES. And then for certain endings, we add an ES, right? But he, she, or it are it, right? If it's first person, I, we. If it's second person, you. If it's plural, they. Then we don't add an ending in present tense. It would just be I work, you work, they work, we work. And we don't have to bother with it. This S ending for he, she, or it is sort of the last little vestige of the old English system that just for some reason didn't die away like all the other verb endings did. So anytime one of my ELL students complain about English and say, oh, Mr. Aaron, why do we have to add an S? I always tell them, well, you're lucky, because if this was old English, you would have to learn a different form of the verb for every different case. But so you're lucky. Add an S for he, she, and it, and that's it. So that seems fairly straightforward. It seems kind of easy, but actually there are some complications. So in English, it's not as simple and straightforward as it appears with just adding S for he, she, and it. So let's take the case of number one, collective nouns. Collective nouns are nouns that refer to a collection of things. And a collective noun can take a singular or plural agreement, depending on how they are conceived by the person speaking or writing. In example 8, Judith's team win most of their matches. In example 9, Judith's team wins most of its matches. So we can see here in example 8, the person who wrote this sentence conceptualizes team as a plurality. It's a group of people, it's multiple people. The pronoun would be they. They win most of their matches. But in example 9, the person who wrote this sentence is conceptualizing Judith's team as a single cohesive unit. The pronoun would be it. It wins, add an S, most of its matches. Example 8 is more common in British English. Example 9 is more common in American English. But if you took every English speaker worldwide and asked them how they conceptualize this noun team, is it singular or plural? It's about 50-50. Half people would say it's plural because it's a group of people, it's they. And about half of the people, including myself, I always conceptualize team as a singular unit. But it's almost 50-50, okay? And it might change depending on the context. So if we look at example 10, we have the possessive noun, which helps clarify that the team is being conceptualized, it's being thought of as a singular cohesive unit. So we're going to use the verb has, H-A-S, because that is the singular form of the verb. The team is being treated as a singular unit. Which way do you think of when you say the team or my team, her team? Do you consider team to be a single unit or a plural unit? In 2, you have singular nouns that have a plural form. If the singular noun has a plural form, it will take a plural agreement. So consider the word scissors. A pair of scissors is one thing. If I say, hand me the scissors, these are my scissors, we understand that scissors, even though there's an S and it sounds plural, it's one individual object. But because scissors is a word in plural form, I'm going to use the plural form of the verb. The scissors are dull. Number 3, we see that plural numbers, when they're applied to distance, money, or time, take singular agreement if the amount is conceived as a single entity. So look at example 13, $6,000. That's obviously plural. There's an S on the noun dollar. There's a number, 6,000. So this is a plural noun phrase, but we don't use the plural form of the verb to be. I do not say $6,000 are too much to pay. I say $6,000 is, because I'm not talking about the $6,000 as a group of money, right? A group of plural dollars. $6,000 is referring to the price or the cost of the car. So I conceive of that plural noun as a single unit. If I was using a pronoun, the pronoun would be it, right? It is too much to pay for that car, or that is too much to pay. I would never say those are too much to pay for the car. Compare sentence 13 with sentence 14. In sentence 14, I could say $6,000 are floating in this pool. Now, I'm not talking about a price or a cost. I'm talking about a literal physical amount of dollar bills that are floating in a swimming pool, and there are 6,000 of those. So now we have a plural noun that we can treat as a plural noun, so it gets the plural form of the be verb. $6,000 bills are floating in this pool. So thinking about subject-verb agreement, if you see your student making a mistake, these are kinds of things to think about. Is there a reason why the student is making this mistake? They see a plural subject, so they match it with a plural verb. Or they see a singular subject, so they match it with a singular verb. And we can see here that that's not always the case, right? Sometimes you can have a plural verb. You can have a plural noun with a singular verb, okay? You could have a singular object like scissors, but scissors is still treated like a plural because it's a plural form, so it gets a plural verb. So being able to recognize these different scenarios can give you an insight into the problems your students are having, and it can help you explain to the student why the grammar works the way it does or why this is wrong. You don't want to just circle these things with a red marker and take points off. and just say it's wrong. We want to explain to our students how this is working. They're learning how to write. And so they're learning grammar. So they need to know what's going on and why they're making the mistake, why their teacher is correcting them or taking points off. And number 3, plural numbers. Okay. Again, okay, this is the same thing. Sorry. So again, plural numbers for time, money, distance. And you can have singular or plural verbs. Okay, things don't work out. Number 4, when the subject contains a coordinate conjunction or the verb usually agrees with the noun phrase that is closest to it. Let's look at example 15. We have a plural noun phrase, 3 professors, or 1 dean. That's a singular noun phrase. What will my verb be? Will it be plural or singular? And in this case, we see that the verb is singular, the singular form of be, because it's right next to the singular noun phrase. If we switch them around, like in example 16, the band leader is singular. The drummers are plural. This is an or conjunction, not and. If it was and, then the whole group would be plural. But here it's an or. So one or the other. How are we going to make our verb agree? The verb is right next to the plural noun phrase, the drummers. So we're going to say the drummers are likely to be. So again, little monkey wrench in our grammar when we have this conjunction or. It literally means that it's literally telling us this verb has to agree with one noun phrase or the other. But one's singular, one's plural. I have a choice. The choice always comes down to who's closest, right? Which noun phrase is right next to the verb phrase. And it's as simple as that. Verbs must agree with the head of a noun phrase, okay? So let's think about noun phrases as opposed to just nouns on their own. Example 19a, a fly in the ointment. We have 2 nouns, fly and ointment. Ointment, though, is not the head of the noun phrase. Ointment is inside the prepositional phrase. It's describing where the fly is. The main verb, the main noun, the head of the noun phrase is a fly. That's singular. The peas in his soup, the peas, plural. The woman of my dreams, the woman is singular. In this case, if these noun phrases are the subject of the sentence, the verb agrees with the head of the noun phrase. The peas in his soup are juicy. Even though that verb are is right next to the word soup, soup is not the head of the noun phrase. Soup is describing peas. So the verb to be must agree with the head peas. The peas are juicy. The woman, singular. The woman is in the next room. These kind of things get even more complicated if you have an incredibly long adjective clause or some other phrase in between the head of the noun phrase and that verb. Sometimes that main noun in your subject can be very far away from the main verb, and sometimes students are writing and they almost forget what was the subject of the sentence? What does this verb need to agree with? So these kind of scenarios become much more common when you get into higher grade levels with more complex writing, and students are writing compound and complex sentences with adjective phrases and adjective clauses and dependent clauses and stuff like that. Number 6, here's an example what I was just talking about. When the subject is very distant from its verb, the subject and verb still must agree, right? Even though we've put a bunch of junk in between the subject and verb. In example 24, we've got this, okay, adjective phrase that's describing the stairwell. It's even got 2 commas, right? A comma before, a comma after. This is telling us that this is extra information, right? This is the extra stuff, like we discussed in chapter 7. It's not the essential part of the sentence, just some extra information, but it comes right between the subject and the verb, and it's making that subject and verb very distant from one another. So again, when a student's writing this, very easy. Even for you and I, we might accidentally use the wrong form of the verb if our brain has kind of forgotten, like, where are we? What was the subject of the sentence again? But no matter how long a chunk of language we put in between the subject and verb, they still must agree with one another, okay? We need to be careful that the verb is not just agreeing with whatever noun is closest. In this case, we have the noun carpenters right before the verb. Carpenters is plural, but we don't want to use the plural form of the verb because carpenters is not the subject of the sentence. A great exercise that you'll find in chapter 12 of your book is to look through these sentences and identify whether or not there's subject-verb agreement error. Some of these sentences may be correct. Some are incorrect. Can you identify where the problem is and then correct it? This is kind of similar to whether or not you would be reading your students' writing and correcting your students' writing. Can you identify the error? Can you correct it? And then imagine you're the teacher and the student wants to know, hey, why is this wrong? What would you say to your student to help them understand the error that they made? Our next subject we're going to talk about is gender in language. So let's again take a little moment to watch a funny little YouTube video here.
All right, French, on to the next word. Hour. Is it masculine or feminine?
Oui, okay. Hour is going to be une heure, so it's going to be feminine.
All right.
Except when it's possessive, then it becomes masculine.
What?
It's very simple. If it's an hour, it's feminine. If it's their hour, it's masculine.
Well, no. French, listen, okay? I agreed to let you have feminine and masculine words, which already was just insane, okay? But you can't have them switch.
But that's boring. Come on, you want to switch it up a little.
No, French, please.
Whoa, espera. A word can be feminine and then change to masculine? I didn't know you could do that.
No, Spanish, we are not doing this, please.
Wait, no, but I like this. How about this? How about water is el agua, but then waters, it's las aguas.
And once again, I'm assuming you guys are doing this to confuse me.
To confuse the Americans. Obviously.
All right. So if any of you have ever studied French or Spanish, I'm assuming most of you took one or the other in high school. Those were sort of the 2 main options. Some of you may even speak a little bit of another language. Many languages in the world, not just French and Spanish, have gender as an important part of their language, the masculine or feminine. Luckily for us, as speakers of English and as future teachers who might have to teach this stuff to kids, there's very little gender in the English language. In fact, the only place that we find gender in English where it's important.
All right, French, on to the next word.
Is pronouns. We have a few gendered pronouns. And we only have gendered pronouns for singular pronouns. So the plural pronoun they can apply to masculine, feminine, or neuter, right? They can be boys or men. They can be girls or women. They can be dogs. They can mean books, right? So it's only in this case of third person singular, oddly enough, the same case where we saw the vestige of that old English where we added an S for he, she, and it, right? It's the same place we see gendered language. Okay, so this comes into consideration when we think about how we're going to write when we have a noun that is ambiguous. In this case, I am referring to a student, and I'm referring to a student in general. It may be a male student, it may be a female student. I'm just talking about a student in general. The traditional way has been to default to the masculine, and we treat a student as male, and we use the pronouns he or his. When a student first enrolls, he should check in with his advisor. If we wanted to avoid using a gendered pronoun, I could use the pronoun one when a student first enrolls. When one first enrolls, one should check in with one's advisor. Unfortunately, this use is not very common at all. I would really be interested to know if any of you ever would say this, because I know I would never say this. It sounds too formal. It almost sounds like something you'd read in like a legal document. It's like legalese or something, or some old-timey work. What is this, Shakespeare? It's too old. It's not really useful in present day. I could try to be equitable and use he or she. When a student first enrolls, he or she should check in with his or her advisor. I'm getting male and female in there. And this might be okay if it was just one sentence or a couple of sentences. But if I was writing a longer document, or if I was speaking and I had to keep repeating he or she, his or her, it might get a little cumbersome. So then I might look for something a little simpler. Okay, I could alternate, right? I could say a student and say she should check in with her advisor. And then a few sentences later, I might say he, his, and then I might alternate and go back to she, her. I could just kind of alternate and go back and forth. Again, it's an option, and I've seen it used before. Some readers might find it a little awkward to keep flip-flopping back and forth, and we certainly don't want to distract anyone in any way. I might try to use a different pronoun, some new pronoun that has been come up with. I've seen this one a little bit. And again, that's okay. We'd have to ask ourselves, if this is the subject pronoun, what am I going to do for the possessive? How would I combine his or her? Do I use his? Do I use her? Do I say his or her? Do I try to combine them in some way? So there's no real agreed upon usage. As a writer, you would sort of be on your own to try to figure out what you wanted to do. And then your reader might be even more distracted if they're not sure, how should I pronounce that? How should I say that? If this is something that's in writing, but then I want to read it out loud, would your reader know how to read it out loud? These are all considerations to consider. And if we remember from way back in chapter 3, when we talked about the minor parts of speech, pronouns are a very closed class. It is nearly impossible to add a word into a closed class. Pronouns could drop, and in the last few hundred years, we have lost pronouns. How many times have you heard someone say thee or thou or thine, right? Again, sounds very Shakespearean. We used to use those pronouns in English. We don't anymore. They disappeared. It's more difficult to add a pronoun. And so I don't see it happening anytime soon. We could just make our lives easier and go to the plural pronoun to avoid gender altogether, since they is not specific as to male or female, and they can actually refer to a nice co-ed male and female group. When students first enroll, they should check in with their advisors. And a lot of style manuals will suggest this, they'll recommend this. If you can use the plural form, use the plural form. It's more inclusive to men and women. So it's, fosters equality and inclusivity without any sort of grammar controversy, which might come about by using some new pronoun. I think everybody can be on board with they. Where it becomes a little more debatable is when we use the plural pronoun they as singular. So you see sentences like, when a student first enrolls, they should check in with their advisor. Some people who are real grammar Nazis will flag this down and say, hey, this is wrong. They is plural. You can't use they to refer to a singular person. I've seen tons of people online, and I've seen a lot of my students use this probably without even thinking about it. I hear it all the time. As an English language teacher, I listen for these kind of things, and I'm hearing it more and more, even like in the news, on the radio. I'm in official sort of documentation on official websites, not just social media, but like on websites. I'm seeing it more and more. It's catching on. It's becoming more popular, and maybe in a generation or two or three generations, we will all be using they to refer to a singular entity. Okay, so depending on whether or not you think it's correct and it should be used, again, that's something for you to consider when you are writing. And if your students write something like this, it's important to know that this might be something that they hear all the time and they use all the time, and so they don't understand what's wrong with it. If you correct them and say this is wrong, we need to be cognizant that well, depending on where the student's growing up, they might say, oh, that's just how people talk. I've heard this. All right. So different things to think about as a teacher who might be correcting their students' writing. At the end of chapter 12, there are some comprehension questions. If you can answer these questions in a kind of a short answer, 3 to 5 sentences, these are the kind of questions that you might see on the final exam. If you want to practice, there were some questions earlier in the video, and these questions, feel free to send me an email with your answers, get some feedback, and you can see, so you can have a better idea of what I'm expecting you to know and how you should answer these questions for the final exam. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions about chapter 12, please don't hesitate to ask.